In 1241, on the fields of Liegnitz, Poland, Duke Henry II stared at the horizon, and what he witnessed made his heart plummet. Thousands of Mongol tents stretched as far as the eye could see. Campfires blazed throughout the night, so numerous they defied counting. A drone echoed through the valley. Scouts returned with alarming news: an uncountable horde, like ants or a plague of locusts, numbering at least 100,000, perhaps even 200,000 warriors. Duke Henry swallowed hard. He commanded a mere 25,000 men, even including Europe's elite Teutonic knights. The odds were 1 to 4, possibly 1 to 8. Yet he had no alternative. If he shirked battle, all of Europe would fall to these eastern nomads. And then the unimaginable transpired. Duke Henry suffered a devastating defeat. He was beheaded, his head paraded through the city on a spear. Nearly 40,000 lives were lost. Europe trembled. But here's what Duke Henry never discovered: his forces were not actually outnumbered.
In fact, he possessed more warriors than his adversary. The Mongol army that day consisted of only 8,000 to 20,000 men. So what, in the name of all that is holy, happened? Before I unveil the answer, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely curious about the time zones across the globe, engaging with videos on Mongol history. Because the story I'm about to share will completely overturn everything you thought you knew about the Mongol army and impart a profound lesson on true strength. Sometimes, numbers aren't what matter. Strategy dictates victory or defeat. Let's begin by debunking an 800-year-old myth. When you envision the Mongol army, what image springs to mind? Likely millions of horsemen, a human and equine ocean surging across the Eurasian continent. Staggering figures: 500,000, 700,000, or even 1,000,000 warriors. This is how textbooks, films, and even many historical documents portrayed them. But here's the truth modern scholars have uncovered. The entire Mongol army at the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227 comprised only about 100,000 to 130,000 actual soldiers, not millions, nor even hundreds of thousands on each battlefield. The entire army of the whole empire was just 100,000 strong. Allow that figure to sink in. Alexander the Great commanded a larger army. Rome, at its zenith, possessed a far greater military force. Yet, the Mongol army, with this modest number, conquered more territory than any empire in history, from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea, from Siberia to Persia. How was this even conceivable? To grasp this, we must trace back to the origin of these inflated figures. Rashid al-Din, a 13th-century Persian historian, wrote that the Mongol army numbered over 600,000. Another historian, Juwayni, claimed their count reached 800,000. Medieval European chroniclers provided even more unbelievable statistics. Some accounts mention Mongol armies in Hungary totaling 500,000 men. But contemporary researchers, cross-referencing with the most reliable source, The Secret History of the Mongols, a Mongol text written immediately after Genghis Khan's death, have discovered the reality. Genghis Khan's core army initially consisted of merely 23,000 cavalrymen. That's right, 23,000. This is the number with which he began his world conquests. By the time of his death, after decades of warfare and recruiting soldiers from conquered territories, the entire Mongol army reached only about 123,000 to 129,000 individuals, according to Rashid al-Din's records, a more credible source, as he was an official at the Mongol court and had access to military documents. However, what is crucial to understand is this: that 100,000 figure represented the empire's entire military. They never concentrated all these individuals in one place. The army was divided into numerous tumens, units of 10,000 men. These tumens operated independently on various fronts, separated by thousands of miles. When the Mongols invaded Europe in 1241, their total invasion force numbered only about 8,000 to 100,000 people, including allied Turkic and Russian tribal units. And this force was further split into 3 or 4 separate armies, each following its own route. In Poland, where Duke Henry confronted a supposedly vast Mongol army, there was actually only a small detachment, a diversionary force of approximately 8,000 to 20,000 individuals. This explains why reliable modern documents, such as the History of the Mongols, report the number of Mongol horsemen invading Poland as 10,000. So why did everyone believe them to be so much more numerous? The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, and one of their most potent tools wasn't their bows or war horses. It was fear.
Imagine you're a European spy, sent to reconnoiter a Mongol camp at night. You ascend a hill and gaze down. You observe thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of flickering campfires stretching to the horizon in the darkness. Upon your return, you report, "Their numbers are countless, like the stars in the heavens. We are doomed." Yet you were unaware of a crucial detail. The Mongols deliberately ignited more campfires than necessary. Every small unit was commanded to kindle several fires, fostering the illusion of a colossal army. This tactic was premeditated and well documented throughout history. And that's not all. The Mongols also employed effigies. They would fasten armor and weapons to mannequins, perch them on spare horses, and allow these horses to trot alongside the troops. From a distance, an adversary would perceive an army 2 or 3 times its actual size. However, the grandest deception didn't stem from these ploys. It originated from the Mongols' combat methodology. Picture yourself as a European knight. You are accustomed to European military strategies. 2 armies form ranks, then charge into a decisive confrontation. Victory goes to the stronger side, the one with more soldiers. But the Mongols disregarded these conventions. The moment you arrange your formation for an assault, you spot a Mongol cavalry detachment emerging on your right flank. They unleash a volley of arrows and vanish. Before you can react, another group materializes on your left, fires more arrows, and retreats. Then from the rear, then from the front again. You pivot right, left, turn around, and they seem to be everywhere. You begin to think, we are encircled. They must have an enormous force to attack from all sides simultaneously. But in truth, it's merely the same cavalry group, moving with incredible speed, striking from various directions. Each Mongol cavalryman typically had 3 to 4 horses. When one horse grew weary, they swapped it for another. This enabled them to cover 100 to 150 kilometers daily, a pace no European army could match. The Persian historian Ata Malik Juvayni depicted the Mongol cavalry as more numerous than ants and locusts, or desert sand, or raindrops. But this wasn't an exact count. It was the perception they created. There's even an interesting observation from Plano Carpini, a European monk who visited the Mongol Empire. He wrote that Mongol flanking maneuvers frequently led opponents to believe they were far more numerous than they actually were. And here lies the paradox. King Hethum I of Armenia, who witnessed Mongol battles, wrote the opposite. He asserted that due to the Mongols' dense and orderly formations, their true numbers were often underestimated, rather than overestimated. These two conflicting observations reveal a great deal. No one knew for certain how many Mongols there actually were, and this was precisely what the Mongols intended. Uncertainty breeds fear. Fear engenders mistakes, and mistakes lead to defeat. Now for the most astonishing part. In most major battles, the Mongols were actually outnumbered by their adversaries, rather than outnumbering them. Impartial researchers meticulously analyzed the Mongols' key battles in Europe and concluded that in the majority of clashes, they were significantly outnumbered. Consider 3 pivotal engagements. The Battle of Liegnitz in 1241. The Polish Duke Henry II assembled a formidable army of 25,000 to 30,000 warriors. It included Teutonic Knights, Templars, and Hospitallers, Europe's elite fighters. They wore heavy armor, were professionally trained, and possessed high morale. They faced a Mongol diversionary force commanded by Khadan and Bader. The most reliable estimates place this force at merely 8,000 to 20,000 cavalrymen. A contemporary document, The History of the Mongols, reports 10,000 men. The ratio: at least 3 European warriors for every Mongol cavalryman, and possibly 1 to 3. Yet the outcome was a total rout for Europe. Nearly 40,000 dead, including over 500 Templar knights. Duke Henry was decapitated. The Battle of Mohi in 1241, just 2 days after Liegnitz. This was a decisive engagement in Hungary. King Bele I gathered one of the largest armies ever seen in Europe, 100,000 warriors. Yes, Hungary at that time was renowned for having the finest cavalry in Europe. They confronted the main Mongol army under the command of Batu Khan and Subutai. According to credible data, the Mongol forces numbered around 80,000, and only a portion of these were actually Mongols. The rest were allied troops from conquered territories. The Hungarians outnumbered them by at least 20%. They fought on their home turf. They held a topographic advantage. They had supply lines, but the result was a catastrophe even worse than Liegnitz. An estimated 60,000 Hungarians perished. The Mongols collected 9 sacks of severed ears, their custom for counting the slain. The Battle of the Kalka River, 1223. This marked the first instance of Mongols fighting on European soil. An alliance of Rus principalities and Cumans assembled a large army to halt the Mongol advance. It is presumed they had between 80,000 and 100,000 warriors. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, Subutai and Jebe, 2 Mongol commanders, led a mere reconnaissance force estimated between 20,000 and 30,000 troops. They faced a combined Russian and Cuman contingent that outnumbered them at least 3-1, potentially boasting 80,000 to 100,000 warriors. Despite the numerical disadvantage, the Mongols executed a classic military feint, staging a panicked retreat and simulating a rout. The Russian forces, convinced of their imminent victory, pursued relentlessly for 9 days. By the time they reached the Kalka River, their troops were exhausted, famished, and their formations entirely fragmented. It was there that the full Mongol army awaited, leading to a decisive and devastating defeat for the Russians. This pattern was typical. In every major engagement, the Mongol forces were numerically inferior, yet consistently emerged victorious. Their triumphs were so absolute and destructive that they sent shockwaves across Europe. The crucial question, therefore, isn't about the size of the Mongol army, but rather how they managed to overcome such odds. The answer lies in 5 perfectly synchronized elements: organization, training, technology, tactics, and, most critically, adaptability. Regarding organization, Genghis Khan revolutionized military structure with his decimal system. He dismantled outdated tribal divisions, replacing them with a new framework. The smallest unit, an arban, comprised 10 men. 10 arbans formed a jan, or 100 men. 10 jans made a mingham, 1,000 men, and 10 minghans created a tumen, a formidable unit of 10,000. While seemingly straightforward, this system was incredibly powerful due to its flexibility. A tumen could operate independently or coordinate seamlessly with others. A jan could detach for specific missions and rejoin the main force without any time-consuming reorganization. Crucially, Genghis Khan dissolved existing tribal loyalties by integrating various tribes into unified units. Their allegiance shifted from tribal chiefs to their unit, their commander, and ultimately to the Khan himself. Training began remarkably early in life. Mongol children were taught to ride horses at the tender age of 3, initially tethered to saddles to prevent falls. By 5 or 6, they could ride proficiently, and by 7 or 8, they were learning archery. By 14, the age of military conscription, a young Mongol man possessed over a decade of experience in both riding and shooting. They could accurately shoot arrows while galloping, even backwards during a retreat, and could switch horses mid-stride without stopping. Contrast this with European knights, who, while proficient in close combat, typically learned horsemanship later and rarely mastered mounted archery. Furthermore, European knights wore heavy armor weighing 30 to 40 kilograms, severely restricting their mobility. Mongol cavalrymen, in contrast, wore only leather or light armor, weighing around 10 kilograms, making them agile, quick, and unencumbered. Technologically, the Mongols' primary weapon was not the sword or spear, but the composite bow. This remarkable bow was constructed from 3 distinct layers:
horn on the inner side to resist compression, wood in the middle, and sinew on the outer side to resist tension. This design provided immense power in a compact form, perfect for use on horseback. A Mongol bow could shoot arrows up to 200 to 250 meters, with accurate targeting up to 150 meters.
Horrifyingly, each cavalryman carried 60 arrows in quivers on their back and saddle. A tumen of 10,000 men thus represented 600,000 arrows. Imagine such a torrent of projectiles descending upon enemy ranks. The most decisive factor, however, was their tactical prowess, particularly the feigned retreat. This involved a group of Mongol horsemen attacking, unleashing a volley of arrows, then turning and fleeing, creating the illusion of panic. The enemy army, believing victory was theirs, would launch into pursuit. The Mongols would continue their retreat, but crucially, they would shoot arrows backward as they rode, an exceptionally difficult skill mastered only by them. They would draw the enemy into a chase lasting hours or even days, as seen at the Kalka River. Once the enemy was exhausted, their formations broken, and far from their base, the entire Mongol army would appear, surrounding them from all sides. At this point, the enemy was too fatigued to fight effectively and too distant to retreat safely. It was a perfect trap, one that Europe repeatedly fell victim to. Finally, none of the above would have been effective without speed. As previously mentioned, each Mongol cavalryman had 3 or 4 horses, allowing them to cover 100 to 150 kilometers a day, an unparalleled pace. In comparison, a medieval European army might only cover 15 to 20 kilometers daily. This afforded the Mongols tremendous tactical advantages. They possessed the capability to appear in unforeseen locations at unexpected moments. They could launch assaults, retreat, flank, and then re-engage from an entirely different direction before their adversaries could react. One particularly striking example exists. Subsequent to the Battle of Liegnitz in Poland, a Mongol detachment needed to relay a message to the primary army in Hungary, situated 450 kilometers away. The dispatch was delivered within 36 hours in the year 1241. No telephones, no telegraphs, solely horses and an impeccably organized relay system. Now, you might inquire, that's an excellent story, but what relevance does it hold for me? I'm not a 13th century Mongol cavalryman. However, that precisely encapsulates the essence. The narrative of the Mongol army transcends a mere historical account. It's a testament to timeless principles of achievement. These principles remain pertinent to this day. The initial lesson: quality supersedes quantity. In today's world, we're frequently fixated on numerical figures. Corporations boast about their employee count. YouTube channels pride themselves on subscriber numbers. Entrepreneurs crow about production volume. Yet, the Mongols imparted the inverse lesson. They did not possess overwhelming numbers. They lacked even cutting-edge technology. Compound bows had existed for millennia prior to their era, but they understood how to leverage their available resources with maximum efficiency. A Mongol horseman underwent training from the age of 3 to 14, amounting to 11 years of continuous preparation. This embodies quality. This is excellence. In your endeavors, you may not possess abundant resources, but can you utilize what you have in the most refined manner possible? The second lesson: order prevails over chaos. Genghis Khan's decimal system appears straightforward, but its power resides precisely in its simplicity. Everyone understood their designated role. Every unit comprehended its assigned task. There was no confusion, no disputes regarding authority. When a commander issued an order, it rapidly disseminated through a clear chain of command. Contrast this with the European armies of that period, a tumultuous assembly of feudal lords, each with their own force, each pursuing personal interests. At the Battle of Liegnitz, there were knights from Poland, Silesia, Lithuania, Teutonic Knights, Templars, and Hospitallers. All were under the nominal command of Duke Henry II. Yet, in reality, they were incapable of coordinating their actions. In business, in life, do you operate with a clear system, or are you navigating through chaos? The third lesson:
Adaptability outweighs brute force. What is remarkable about the Mongols is their continuous learning and capacity for adaptation. Initially, they lacked the skills to besiege heavily fortified cities, but during their conquest of China, they mastered siege techniques from Chinese engineers. They hired these engineers and transported them to Persia and Europe. When soldiers were needed, they recruited from subjugated peoples, Turks, Persians, Russians, and integrated them into the army. Importantly, they did not employ them as slaves, but meticulously trained them to Mongol standards. When they required a fleet to attack Japan, they constructed an armada of 5,000 vessels and 70,000 sailors, despite the fact that the steppe-dwelling Mongols knew nothing of the sea. This is adaptability. It is the humility that permits learning what one does not know. In our rapidly evolving modern world, adaptability is more crucial than ever. Are you prepared to acquire new knowledge, or do you cling to what you already know? The fourth lesson: perception shapes reality. The Mongols grasped that warfare was waged not merely on the battlefield, but also within the adversary's mind. They deliberately created the impression of an immense army. They left ruined cities as a cautionary example. They allowed rumors of their ruthlessness to circulate, not because they relished killing. In fact, cities that surrendered did not suffer. Rather, their aim was for the subsequent city to surrender without a fight. And this strategy proved incredibly effective. Some cities opened their gates and capitulated simply upon hearing of the Mongols' approach, without ever laying eyes on a single soldier. In the contemporary world, brand, marketing, and image continue to hold immense significance, not for deception, but for establishing an accurate representation of the value you deliver. The fifth lesson: measure and optimize. There is a small yet fascinating detail concerning the Mongol method of warfare. Before each engagement, they would arrange a small pile of pebbles, each representing a soldier. Following the battle, they would collect individual pebbles for each survivor. The remaining pebbles symbolized the deceased or gravely wounded. This was a straightforward but potent system of measurement. It enabled commanders to precisely ascertain casualties and to adjust tactics for the next confrontation. In life and work, are you measuring what truly matters? Are you learning from the outcomes and making necessary adjustments? Returning to Duke Henry II on the fields of Liegnitz, upon perceiving the Mongol army, he concluded that he faced an insurmountable and invincible force. He fought valiantly, but with trepidation in his heart. And this fear compelled him to err. He fell into a trap. He permitted his battle formation to disintegrate. He lost even before the actual battle commenced. But here's a thought-provoking query. What if he had been privy to the truth? Had he recognized that their forces weren't numerically superior to his, or had he grasped Mongol stratagems and prepared accordingly, the course of events might have unfolded quite differently. This encapsulates the ultimate, most profound lesson. Knowledge is power. A thorough comprehension of one's adversary, a clear-eyed assessment of the actual situation, and profound self-awareness form the bedrock of triumph. The Mongol army, numbering merely 100,000 strong, forged the largest empire in history, not through supernatural means. Their success stemmed from superior organization and training, the deployment of more effective tactics, and, most crucially, a deep understanding that the decisive factor isn't sheer magnitude or resource abundance, but the astute management of those resources. Perhaps you perceive yourself as lacking funds, time, skills, or connections. You observe others and assume they possess greater advantages. Yet, this could be a mere illusion. It's plausible they too operate with limited resources, but act with cohesion and swiftness. Perhaps attaining millions of followers isn't necessary. 100 dedicated and passionate collaborators might suffice. Or perhaps you don't need to master every existing skill, but rather profoundly excel at a select few pivotal competencies. The saga of the Mongols stands as a potent reminder.
One must never underestimate the capacity of a unified, disciplined collective of individuals propelled by a well-defined objective. A contingent of 100,000 Mongol warriors managed to overcome armies numbering in the millions.
You, leveraging your current assets, are capable of achieving outcomes that appear unattainable to others. Now, I'm eager to hear your perspective. Which lesson from the history of the Mongol army do you believe holds relevance in contemporary life? Please share your reflections in the comments section. And if you found this video insightful, kindly hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to support its growth. Remember, in life's struggles, victory doesn't belong to the one with the largest army, but to the one who most judiciously deploys their capabilities. Thank you for watching.